A good Sunday. I just figured we'd cover this. Why am I doing this in a stream? Because I can. That's, I think, the best answer for just about anything in life. So I heard about this from usual suspects, the Duran, New Atlas, that kind of thing. So just hat tip in that direction. But this is from Reuters. This is not from like TASS. This is not from. I'm trying to think who else. Who else? Russia Today. This isn't from the the Times of India, or any of that. This is Reuters. I was having trouble coming up with a title for this because the level of like insanity and retardation that is contained within this article is kind of hard to quantify. To be perfectly honest, this whole thing is just it's nuts. So we're gonna go through it. Now, a couple notes just before we start. I was trying to do some of my own research on this. I was trying to figure out, okay, so how much TNT do different countries produce? How much munitions do, like how much other explosives, how much gunpowder, ammonium nitrate, who imports what? I spent about an hour on it. I couldn't find anything. I don't know if Google's just heavily censored when it comes to this stuff, but the whole thing is just a mess. So I just kind of gave up after trying to find it for a while because it didn't seem like a point. So we're just going to use the Reuters article, which is quite extensive. But we're gonna do. I'm gonna start off with a poll. Maybe not like a formal poll. How much? Press 1 if you think that Reuters. Well, this is. I heard about it through the Duran. This is not the. This isn't. They didn't write this article. Press 1 if you think Reuters cited every source they used in this article. And it's all like fully researched, and you're able to go through this with no trouble. And if you want to look up any of the things that they referenced, it's easy to do. Press 2 if you think like almost none of this has any sources and they just were too lazy to post them. So we'll get through that. So let's go through this. Let me just update the thumbnail because the thumbnail for this is shit. Wish YouTube had better thumbnail generation. Like, I wish it just auto-removed the black. I mean, I get why it doesn't, but I'm still going to complain about it. But yeah, like I said, I was going through and I was trying to do my own research, and like, I couldn't find any of this. I probably could spend some more time, but I just don't feel like it. Like, I'm just gonna, you know what? We're just gonna do this based on journalistic integrity, which the source is Trust Me Bro, and in order for it to not be fake news, we can't say where we get things from. So that's my guess. Okay then, so let's get into this. Years of miscalculations by U.S. NATO have led to dire shell shortage. Okay. So this might take a little while. I'm going to put my AC on. Let me know if the AC is a bit too loud. Sorry, I live in a continental climate, so it's incredibly hot here in the summer. Okay, let me know if that's too loud, and I'll see what I can do. Okay, on the front lines of this old industrial city, soldiers in the trenches say a shortage of an all-important munition. The 155mm artillery shell has turned the war in Russia's favor. I thought Russia was... Let's see here, Russia... Wait, Russia is producing 3 times as many shells? Like, when will the ammunition shortage silence Russian artillery? We have Russia's... Okay, so let's just see here. 1 second. We're just going to do a little field trip. So, BBC, Russia's struggling with supply of weapons and ammunition for Ukraine war. This is August. This is February 21st of this year. This is from CNN 2 weeks later. Exclusive: Russia producing 3 times more artillery shells than the U.S. and Europe for Ukraine. So that is, I don't know. Maybe it's like one of these has to be fake. Like they can't both be true. It's extreme challenge. Russia's domestic ammunition production is insufficient for meeting the needs of the Ukraine conflict. Well, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, so let's go back to this. Okay. Many of them blame the supply crunch on the U.S. Congress for failing to quickly approve a $60 billion military aid package, which passed after months of delay in April. The U.S. and European nations have pledged that assistance is on its way, but while fresh supplies have been delivered, Ukraine is still massively outgunned. Really? The causes of the shell shortage began years ago. They are rooted in decisions and miscalculations made by the U.S. Army and its NATO allies that occurred well before Russia's 2022 invasion. A Reuters investigation found it's the mystery Scooby-Doo couldn't solve. They had to investigate this. No, PsyOp Watch, we'll get into it. They talk about why this is the case. Basically, it's because it's a combination of profit motive and in environmental regulations. This is something so TNT, as we'll get into, is kind of environmentally destructive. So the U.S. made the decision that we're just going to outsource TNT production to China, so we don't have to deal with it here. And like I said, we'll get into it. This article goes over it. A decade of strategic funding and production mistakes played a far greater role in the shell shortage than did recent U.S. congressional delays of aid, Reuters found. It's I thought the $61 billion was what was needed. But it turns out that wasn't the issue. They just can't produce the shells. Weren't they saying everybody was insane who said that? And if they just got the $61 billion, everything would work out. In the years between Russia's 2014 seizure of Crimea and its 2022 invasion, for example, repeated warnings from NATO's top commanders and officials who operated or supervised U.S. munition plants were largely unheeded. They advised their governments both publicly and privately that the alliance's munition industry was ill-equipped to surge production should war demand it. Why would you need to be able to surge production? So let's just think about this for a minute. So Russia seized Crimea. You are the closest that you've come in basically since, I don't know, maybe the 1990s, the 1980s or whatever, to a major industrial war in Europe. And the response to that was, and we'll go down, is just to do nothing. If we look at it, I guess it went from absolutely nothing to nothing is where we are. They didn't think that would be a good time to ramp up shell production because artillery won't play a role in a future war. Who uses artillery in war? Especially in conventional conflicts. Let's see here. Because of the failure to respond to those warnings, many artillery production lines that are already ancient factories in the United States and Europe slowed to a crawl or closed altogether. This is a problem that's been long in the making. Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology from 2018 to 2021. Reuters interviewed dozens of current and former U.S., Ukrainian, and North Atlantic Treaty Organization military officials and reviewed thousands of pages of confidential U.S. Army briefings, public documents, and internal records, none of which they will cite in this article. So that's cool. Production of the 155 millimeter shell dropped so dramatically that from summer 2014 to fall 2015, the U.S. added no new shells to its stockpile. Crimea got seized, and the response was just not to produce more shells. That's a good idea. That was, how much money does the U.S. spend on defense? And they can't even they can't even provide their army with like the most fucking basic things like munition. They don't even produce enough gunpowder. We'll get into that later. Like, they've regressed beyond the 19th century on this one. Manufacturing defects and safety violations triggered repeated production line shutdowns. The 2021 discovery of cracks in shells cut production capacity in half for months. I thought that Russian shells were horrible. I thought they had no quality control. I thought that made in the USA, we have to buy American. But it turns out the American shells suck. Okay. Once again, this is Reuters. This is Reuters talking to Western officials. This is not them talking to Russians. This is not them talking to North Koreans. This is them talking to NATO and U.S. Defense Department. A U.S. decision to change the type of explosives used in these shells hasn't helped the war effort, and to date hasn't been an expensive flop. The U.S. Army spent $150 million on a facility it doesn't use. Okay, so I had trouble finding this, but as far as I can tell, they got rid of... They wanted to switch the explosive that's used in their shells from TNT to some new thing that they came up with that's less environmentally destructive but has a similar force. And they just don't actually produce a significant amount of it, to my understanding. So they don't use the explosive that's been used for like well over 100 years. I think, when was TNT invented? I think it was the 1800s, wasn't it? When was TNT invented? Okay, yeah, dynamite was invented in 1876. So TNT is initially what was in dynamite, and my using nitroglycerin, and it's what's been kind of the standard for bombs. I'm not sure if that's what high explosives use. Let me see here. Okay, no. High explosive, I think, is also that. So maybe if someone can tell me what kind of explosives do explosives do high explosive shells use? Is it just TNT, I guess? In a plan to replace an antiquated plant in Virginia that produced propellant to launch the shells, has fallen a decade behind its scheduled completion and has almost doubled in price. This delay has created a greater U.S. Reliance on raw materials from overseas than is publicly known. One internal U.S. document from 2021 detailed foreign dependencies on at least a dozen chemicals made in China and India, countries with close trade ties to Russia. So, keep in mind, what is propellant? Propellant is, to my understanding, gunpowder. I could be wrong, but I think it's gunpowder. So, the U.S. has to import gunpowder and explosives from China, a country that they're going to... what? So they're like, we're going to go to war with China, but we won't have enough gunpowder. Yes, I've used the deep state for the yoga thing. The U.S. pre-war plan for sourcing explosive TNT from overseas included... Let's see if we can find a picture of this, because my understanding is the American plants look like complete garbage. Propellant... Okay, I think this is it. I've heard that this place is like a complete shit show. Or is there just no... I think maybe that's it. I don't know. I've heard that these plants are really bad and they haven't been retrofitted for like 30, 40 years, but whatever. We'll just move on. Particularly ironic, the U.S. Pre-war plan for sourcing the explosive TNT from overseas included contracts with a factory in eastern Ukraine that was seized by Russia. So they were dependent on purchasing TNT. Okay, let's pretend Russia didn't invade Ukraine. So if they were going to go to Russia, the factory they needed to produce explosives for like the most basic ammunition was located in eastern Ukraine, right across the border with Russia. Does anyone see a problem with that? Like, so within like 24 hours, Russia could have just fired hypersonic missiles at that, and then the U.S. would have been screwed or operating with a handicap for the rest of the war. So they lost that. That's cool. This is the historical numbers. They're trying to ramp it up now, but there's only so much they can ramp it up when it's gone. Big guns and shells that fire are pivotal to Kiev's ability to hold the 1,000-kilometer front. The artillery functions day or night, regardless of weather. The 155-millimeter shell and its Russian equivalent are considered crucial because they combine the explosive power and extended range needed to destroy armor and inflict casualties. That is, I like how they have to explain what artillery is. Like, did you know there's this thing called artillery, and it's really good? And it's been like a cornerstone of military warfare since the ancient since antiquity. Since the war has begun, artillery has proved so lethal that it's caused more than 80% of casualties on both sides, according to estimates by Ukrainian military commanders. My understanding is in war, very few casualties actually come from small arms. Very few come from big arms. Major Anton Bayev, who helped coordinate artillery strike, well, we actually have a source, wow, for frontline troops in the Crimea forest about 60 kilometers from Kramatorsk, said the shell shortage left him feeling naked. Starting in the fall, he said supplies of old Soviet shells were all but gone, and 155 millimeter shells were running low. By spring, there were times when his whole brigade had 4 shells a day to cover at least a dozen kilometers of territory. Four shells? Like, what the fuck can you do with 4 shells? Like, let's think about this for a minute. The U.S. is... What are they using? Like 6,000 shells a day? 6 to 10,000. It depends on what phase of the war. If Ukrainian casualties are like 1,500 a day or what, it's hard to know. But it takes a number of shells per person that dies. So 4 shells might not even be enough to kill 1 Russian. It might not even be enough to wound 1 Russian. Also, with artillery, don't you have to adjust? So you have to fire 1, and then you have to maybe adjust your aim. Maybe that's not as big a deal with modern weapons, but I don't know. Times this whole 4 shells, like. And once again, I keep giving the Ukrainian army like all the credit in the world. They have to fight under these circumstances. They have to deal with these assholes who are making them fight a war with no artillery. Like, I heard another story. I can't. Where's the article? Ukrainian army training 14 rounds. I think I'm not sure where it was, but I heard that they only got like rounds of ammunition. I'm trying to find it because I saw somewhere that it was a very small amount of ammunition that they're allowed to even use during training. I think they're low on like small arms. It's very hard to witness my infantrymen being destroyed when I cannot do anything, said the 30-year-old commander. So another part of the whole artillery thing and why it's leading to higher casualties is a big thing. And if you've ever seen, I hate to refer to movies, but a big reason for things like machine guns and mortars and artillery is to suppress the enemy. And that means you don't necessarily, it means you don't necessarily hit them. But if you're firing, if there's a machine gun set up and it's firing burst at a position, the guys there can't like get up. They can't get up. They can't run. They're pinned down. And then maybe you can flank them or something or call in bigger artillery. But if you have artillery, your opponent has to be very careful. They have to hide their artillery. They have to move it around a bunch. If you don't, then they can just sit it in one spot and you get what I mean. Like, I don't think that's that controversial. I don't think I need to be a strategic genius to understand that. Zelensky said there is no artillery shortage, an assessment disputed by the frontline commanders. Regardless, in a recent interview, Zelensky urged Western allies to provide more help more quickly. See, there's none. Once again, and I'm going to go back to this over and over again. Zelensky said they have lost 31,000 soldiers. Just keep that in mind. 31,000. Okay, so consistent. It's easy. Okay, some defense and analysts say second-guessing decisions that led to the supply crunch is overly simplistic. No, it is not. You need fucking ammunition to fight a war. Like, if your men can't fire their weapons, then it's over. Like, I don't care how many smart bombs or whatever. At the end of the day, if the SEALs can't fire their guns, like, I don't know. Clearly, in the industrial base, it's easy to criticize leaders of the past for not consistently funding munitions. Clearly, the industrial base would be in a better place today if they had done so. Where did the money go? Let me see here. I'm just gonna play a clip.
Where's the money, Lebowski? You want that money, Lebowski? Bunny says you're good for it. Where's the money, Lebowski?
That's a good question. Okay, but unable to fund had it upgraded its munition. Okay. But Lord Richards, David Richards, the former British chief of the defense staff and NATO commander of Afghanistan, said that since the end of the Cold War, politicians in Western nations have frequently overruled the advice of the more capable NATO commanders. If the NATO commanders are capable, they're in a bad spot. These commanders, he said, had warned of the dangers of not keeping artillery ammunition stocks higher. Instead, Richards had said policymakers took what he called a production gamble by assuming militaries could restart production in time for when munitions were needed. Now, if you've ever played a Factorio or a Colony Sim or something like that, you realize that production is a little bit more complicated than there's a shell factory and you just click the on button with the shell factory. There's all kinds of stuff. You need lead. You need to make the shell casings. As we said here, you need the gunpowder and the various chemicals needed to make the gunpowder. You need the TNT and the stuff that's used to make the TNT. You need people you need the machine tools. You need the steel that goes into making the machine. It's a very complicated process. You can't just flip an on switch and goes to that. You also need people who know how to do this. Because if there's one thing you don't want people with no experience doing, it's making munitions. Because they can explode. And they can destroy, just basically level, entire cities. It's not a good idea. So I'm just going to have a sip of coffee. So, I think they're thinking that this is like World War II. So, The big thing during World War II is America was an industrial giant at the time. And they were able to flip a lot of their industry over from domestic to wartime production. Now, this makes sense to me because I'd imagine a lot of the skills required to make a car are transferable to a tank, like the riveting, the welding. I'd imagine aspects of the engine are similar. The production line is set up. I'm sure it's not too hard if you have a bunch of people who are trained at manufacturing and you have the machine tools and the conveyor belts and stuff to flip over. I assume a lot of the same steel is the main component in both, aluminum, tungsten, stuff like that. If you're already producing that, I think it's probably a lot easier to do that. Now, something that Russia does, and this is expensive, but apparently it works out, is they keep their munition plants working, or their munition plants functioning, or in working order, and they ensure they have adequate stocks and supply chains in case something like this happens. Yeah, tanks were less complicated then too. My point is, like, if you have some understanding of how to fix a car, you probably have a much better understanding of how to fix a tank than the average person. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, it isn't, but it helps. Recent congressional delays did slow U.S. military aid to Ukraine, said Doug Bush. The effect was real on the battlefield. Bush saw a silver lining in the repeated warnings outlining munitions production woes. They provided a roadmap for action after Russia's invasion. We were really lucky we had done that work because as soon as the war started, your ammo plants needed more help to meet the surge, and we're like, we have a plan, the one we already gave you. Early in the war, the U.S. and its... Have you ever seen, like, the guys who are doing these now? Like, most of the people who are doing these, if you look at them, are like, and you can see that here, are like old dudes left over from the Cold War. They're like old white guys. They're going to be replaced by diversity and inclusion. People who have, like, degrees in, I don't know, in gender studies, and we're going to expect them to, like, make the shells and stuff like that. And that's the plan. You're losing all this institutional knowledge. I'm sure a lot of these guys are getting purged. I'm sure a lot of these guys are being purged because the industry's too white, or they're being forced into retirement. And once that institutional knowledge is gone, I don't really know how it's coming back. Like, let's see here. By the end of the last year, Ukraine supplies its Soviet artillery shells. Its standard long-range caliber, measuring 1.52 in diameter, had been nearly exhausted. The dramatic production shortfalls of the comparable Western 1.55, coupled with the insatiable need of Ukrainian forces for ordnance, has meant the U.S. has sought the munition from other nations and has needed to draw substantially from its own stockpile. How many 1.55 shells the U.S. Army has in reserve is classified. But the Army, which made fewer than 3,000 shells per month in the mid-2010s, says it's now producing about 36,000 shells a month. So let's think about this for a minute. Ukraine fires, what, like 6,000 shells a day? So the U.S. was producing, like, enough in a year for 1 week of fighting in Ukraine. Think about this for a minute. Think about this for a minute. Like, what? The U.S. was producing the amount of shells in a year that Ukraine needed in a week. And that was the plan. And, like, if you notice, people are making fun of Russia for buying shells from North Korea. They're making fun of Russia for having all these, like, old tanks in reserve and stuff like that, and old weapons in reserve and stuff. Well, it turns out that, like, even if they're not very effective, more firepower is generally better than less firepower. And NATO has acknowledged this as well. So they're sending the Leopard 1s. I don't know if they actually sent the Leopard 1s to Ukraine. The Leopard 1 has bad armor. It's hopelessly out of date. But it is, at the end of the day, it's a tank with a highly accurate long range gun. And even if you're going to use it to lead assaults, I mean, it's still use. If you're an infantryman, would you rather have a Leopard 1 supporting you with, I think it's a 105 millimeter gun from a ways away that can take shots at like enemy positions, or not? I mean, and that's why they have like the T-54s and stuff like that, is they can just use them for more firepower. So but they made fun of them for that. To help, okay, so Congress approves $6 billion to produce new shells, upgrade old factories, and build new ammunition plants. It's just that simple. You can solve it by spending money. Whether these efforts will prove too little and too late to halt Russian offensives remains in question. What's clear is that while Moscow is able to quickly pivot to a war economy and source shells from allies, the shortages have left Ukraine painfully outgunned. I don't know if you, for those of you who have seen kind of some, I think that it's in Band of Brothers. I read Aubrey Murphy's memoir To Hell and Back. If you look at the biggest, I think, other than maybe the M1 Garand being a semi-auto service rifle, something the U.S. did really well in World War II was having accurate, coordinated artillery fire. If you watch a lot of these things, you can see there's a radio operator who's able to just call in artillery fire from just about anywhere. And they can even do it in fairly close proximity, and it'll just devastate whatever it's going up against. Like if the U.S. gets pinned down, they call in artillery fire. That was one of the things that they did really well. So one of the things that they're having to do now is, I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but the Ukrainian armed forces are searching through swamps and bogs and the battlefield to try to find unexploded shells so that they can repair them and use the unexploded shells. Now, while I applaud the economical thinking, I kind of feel like this is a bad idea. To be handling explosive shells, like damaged explosive shells. That doesn't sound like a good idea to me, but what do I know? Last October, Ukrainian offensive ended abruptly, and troops went from shelling to shoveling. Soldiers remembered the order: stop attacking and start digging trenches. With limited artillery, the Ukrainian attack had ended. So I know you guys have probably heard this story that the Russian army was using shovels. Well, specifically Wagner was. So my understanding of what happened, what wound up happening is Wagner had an entrenching team. So as soon as they would take a position, they would have a bunch of dudes with shovels and entrenching equipment ready to go, and they would run up and start digging trenches. So I don't think they were using the shovels to fight, although shovels, I mean, don't Green Berets and like special forces use their entrenching tools as a close range weapon to dig trenches? But digging trenches, much like spaced armor, is something that doesn't exist. Let's see here. When Ukraine was firing 10,000 shells per day, between 35 and around 40 Ukrainian soldiers were killed daily, and about 250 were wounded. But when the daily fire fell to half that, more than 100 Ukrainian soldiers were killed per day, and at least 1,000 were wounded. So Ukraine, according to this, is taking over 1,000 casualties a day. So they're taking over $1,000 a day. Which I think is about what the Russian Defense Ministry is claiming. So that means Ukraine's taking over 365,000 casualties a year, but they've only 31,000 people have died, guys. Meanwhile, Ukrainians say that for every shell their forces fire, Russia fires at least 5. Compounding the problem, Ukraine faces a critical and growing shortage of troops compared to Russia. How is that possible? I thought that Russia was out of men. Even before the funding from Congress was delayed, the Ukrainians had been told by U.S. officials that shells could not be provided quickly enough to meet their military needs. It's very important for our infantry to hear the sound of our artillery every hour just to understand they are not alone in the field, and there are guys behind them who are ready to support them. Like, if this is what you're getting to, you've already lost. If like your dudes in the field are panicked because they don't hear your artillery at all, and you're at that level of concern, then you've already lost. It's over. By summer, and I just like to say once again, if any Ukrainians want to come to Canada, I will take any number. We will take any number of Ukrainian refugees. If the entire population of Ukraine wants to move to Canada, I'm cool with that. I'm 100% cool with that. By 2023, however, okay, so barely half of the 2 million rounds they ended up receiving in 2023. We should adjust our warfare approach and live with a reduced supply of shells, because if you're having slow-moving trench warfare, you don't need artillery shells. That's not what, like, why? So once again, how the war is actually going is kind of irrelevant to the point I'm trying to make here. The point is that our leaders are fucking retarded. Like, they have no idea what they're doing. The U.S. spends, what, like 40% of the world's defense spending, and they can't make artillery shells? North Korea can? Iran can? But they can't? I don't know. Which led... the 155 shell was little used in Iraq and Afghanistan, America's two big wars this century, which led many military planners to believe the weapon was growing obsolete. But these so-called asymmetric wars, which pitted a superpower's regular military against insurgent irregulars, differed greatly from the conventional fighting. Here in Ukraine, where two mass armies are shooting it out, the value of artillery is borne out by casualty. Really? In September, U.S. officials told the Ukrainians, we have to move from the old era of military warfare to more technological things. This is just the way it is. Drones, for example, have played a significant role in the war. Just replace the artillery with drones. Let me see if I can find this. Okay. Ben Hodges. I'm just seeing if this is still behind a paywall. Yeah, it's still behind a paywall.
High-tech American weapons work against Russia until they don't.
Okay, we're just going to listen to this because it's behind a paywall. So this is former British General Ben Hodges.
Moscow is learning how to defeat Western precision munitions in Ukraine. By Yaroslav Trofimov. July 10th, 2024, 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time. The Excalibur artillery round performed wonders when it was introduced into the Ukrainian battlefield in the summer of 2022. Guided by GPS, the shells hit Russian tanks and artillery with surgical precision as drones overhead filmed the resulting fireballs. That didn't last. Within weeks, the Russian army started to adapt, using its formidable electronic warfare capabilities. It managed to interfere with the GPS guidance and fuses so that the shells would either go astray, fail to detonate, or both.
So they didn't plan at all. They're just like, okay, well, we're going to have these like super advanced GPS rounds, which I'm sure are very good, but like we thought the Russians were retarded. We thought that the Russians didn't know how to do jamming. We thought that they couldn't figure out how to jam things, that them and the Chinese couldn't do electronic warfare, and that was the assumption we went into this war with.
By the middle of last year, the M982 Excalibur munitions, developed by RTX and BA Systems, became essentially useless and are no longer employed, Ukrainian commanders say. Several other weapons that showcase the West's technological superiority have encountered a similar fate. Russian electronic countermeasures have significantly reduced the precision of GPS-guided missiles fired by HIMARS systems, the weapon credited for reversing the momentum of the war in Ukraine's favor in the summer of 2022. Ukrainian military officials say a brand new system, the ground-launched small-diameter bomb munition, manufactured by Boeing and Sweden Saab, has failed altogether after its introduction in recent months, in part because of Russian electronic warfare. Ukrainian and Western officials say it is no longer in use in Ukraine pending an overhaul.
That's their version of the glide bomb. So I think there's more of it, but it's behind a paywall, and I have not been able to figure out how to get past this one. So that was the plan. Still, the advice was also necessitated by what some U.S. and NATO officials say was poor planning, a misguided belief that industry in the U.S. and Europe could quickly reverse more than 3 decades of funding cutbacks and plant closures. But there weren't funding cutbacks. Let's see here. U.S. military spending over time. There is no funding. What are they talking about? The funding is continually increased. There's no cutback in defense spending. Are they saying, like, this is the cutback in defense spending when it went down to how... Like, what? Still, okay, let's see here. People understood the risk, and we took the risk because it was assumed the industry could surge, said a former U.S. military official who participated in a 2023 Army. Once again, people who, like, play, I don't know, what are some, let me look at Steam, what are some procedural, or some games like that? Okay, let's see. What games are like Factorio? I haven't actually played Factorio. People who play Against the Storm have a better understanding of military production than the leaders of than our leadership does. I don't know. People who play Manor Lords. People who play Manor Lords should apparently be running the defense industry because they have a better comprehension. People who play RimWorld. Okay, I don't think we understood collectively how challenged the industry would be to turn on a dime. Really? The review was conducted by retired generals and military leaders for the Army Science Board, an advisory group that offers technical guidance to senior officials. It cited other problems that made a search for war difficult, costly environmental requirements, bureaucratic contracting processes, decades of erratic funding from a divided Congress, and an army habit of diverting funds budgeted for ammunition to other problems. This state of affairs has been obscured for years, the report stated. Yet it was well known among the top echelons of the U.S. military and NATO commanders. Let's see here. It doesn't seem like anyone had a holistic view of the entire defense production industry. Let's see here. Biden acknowledged the depth of the munitions production last week, confronting the alliance. We need a new industrial policy in the West. It came as a surprise to some of us how we had fallen. How is it a surprise? How is it once again, a lot of this information is so we're supposed to believe that, like, the CIA doesn't have basic production numbers. Like, the CIA has no idea how much the US, like, it's so fucking stupid. And that's why I have to wonder, are these people, like, this dumb, or is this deliberate, or I don't know. In 2 years before Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, ever noticed they always say that? U.S. Army sent a civilian advisor on a mission. Jet ordered advisor Joseph Ahmadi to visit Rahmi Ahmadi to visit America's ammunition plants to answer two fundamental questions. Does the U.S. have enough munition on hand for war? And if not, can America's industrial base move quickly if war breaks out and more ammunition is urgently needed? Ahmadi, a former PepsiCo and Pillsbury factory executive, has served in the Army and later as an advisor to Iraq. He said he was appalled by what he found. Now, people can make fun of him for that, but to a certain level, production is production. If you understand how supply chains work for one thing, I'm sure you have some understanding of how it works for another. It's not like it's moving TNT around is completely different than moving cola beans around. Among the locations he toured were three U.S. munition plants critical to producing 155. These shells contained a high explosive that shatters their metal casing into lethal shrapnel. They are fired from cannons with bags of gunpowder, the propellant. These three elements have been proved crucial since World War I. As he made the tours, he came across problems he found absurd. In Ukraine, in Tennessee, he walked the floor of a brand new but idle $150 million factory built for use in the explosive process. Parts of the plants was literally gathering cobwebs, he recalled. In Pennsylvania, he toured a dilapidated shell factory first used for the Korean War. It has been lightly used by the military for years in the mid-2010s and was now limping along with no significant upgrades as funded. In Iowa, he was briefed on manufacturing flaws, including cracked 155 shells that shut down one production line for months. Is this really like something you want? Like, shouldn't that be a big concern if the explosive shells in the factory full of explosive stuff have major production flaws? I think if there's one place you want to blow the extra money on safety, that's probably it. And in Virginia, he visited a $400 million construction project running a decade behind. What's with the $399? Is this like retail where it's like $99.99? Significantly over budget and still struggling to produce the propellant needed to launch the 155 millimeter shell. It's gunpowder. It's fucking gun. When was gunpowder invented in China? Okay, gunpowder has existed since the 9th century. But the U.S. can't do it. They can't build fucking gunpowder. We were talking about it all the time. What are we going to do if we go to war here? We can't just ramp this stuff up in one day. We're in a bad situation, he recalled. Let's see here. Oh, I mean, the answer is diversity is our strength. You got to get rid of these white dudes. This guy probably votes for Trump. This guy probably votes for Trump. This guy almost certainly votes for Trump. You got to get rid of them. Let's see here. Where is interview? Let's see. I'm just going to skim through some of this. Cited core critical or immediate modernization needs of plants where 155 shells are manufactured. Transformational change across the industrial base. Without funding and upgrades, contractors told the Army that years-long backlogs and breakdowns at shell factories would only get worse. A confidential June 2021 briefing from General Dynamics to an Army general noted that absent improvements, production of 155 shells would fall by half by 2023. So wait a minute, they're not actually improving production? Production is going down? Because the machinery sucks and it's breaking? Okay. 83 pieces of equipment used to make 155 were more than 50 years old. General Dynamics, which makes shell casings, declined to... well, it's good. If it's lasted for 50 years, then that's great. Let's see here. In the U.S., most plants making 155 ammunition are owned by the U.S. Army, but operated by private contractors. What does that even mean? So it's literally socialized loss for privatized gain. The army, let's see, there's greater risk in not doing so. Let's see here. Why are fundamental essential functions of defense manufacturing done in museum-like conditions? Okay, we need tighter oversight of army plants. Okay, so there's still much work to be done heading into 2022. Money wasn't the only problem suppressing the West's ability to prepare for war. In the decade before Russian 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. military made a key decision about the kind of explosives to use for the 155 shell and which suppliers to rely on, Reuters found. The choice proved unwise. It not only slowed the production rate, but also left the West struggling to quickly find enough high explosive to ramp out output. The decision to move away from TNT, the explosive is valued for its high stability. Professor of energetics at the University of Munich. That is, it can be melted and poured into shell casings without exploding. Since before World War II, TNT... Okay, alright, so we'll just go through this. In a forest in western Ukraine, a complex on the same site where a factory was built by Nazi German occupiers to support invasion of the Soviet Union now makes thousands of tons of TNT every year. The problem for Ukraine is this factory located near the city of whatever is the last surviving TNT plant in Europe or North America. So the only... Let's just think about this for a minute. The only TNT plant, according to Reuters, that the West has access to is in Poland. One. That's it. What would happen if that factory broke down? They have to import all of it. Like, so they couldn't build stuff at all then. What if they went to war and Russia hit this with a couple hypersonic missiles? They'd be fucked. Like, whoa, buddy. Workers there know work around the clock. It's run by a state-owned company, Nitrochem, and makes about 10,000 tons of TNT per year. The company's declined to say exactly how much. A single 155 millimeter round typically requires about 10 kilograms of TNT. That means that 10,000 tons of TNT would be enough to provide for about 1 million rounds if every bit was used for 155 millimeter shells. So where does the rest of it come from? Like, where does the rest of the... I guess they have to import it from China. Because they want to produce more than 1 million shells. That's also assuming that none of this is used in construction. None of this is used in industry. It's not used in mining. It's been packed into shells with other ingredients and added to the shrinking U.S. Army stockpile. The oldest shells are shipped back to Poland and then on to Ukraine. Few countries today produce TNT primarily because of environmental concerns about contamination from the highly toxic chemicals produced in the manufacturing process. Germany closed its last TNT plant in 1990, and in Britain, a TNT plant at Bridgewater in Somerset was closed in 2008, the last of 4 TNT factories in the country dating to World War II. When the Somerset plant was slated for closure, a report by trade unions warned that Britain would lose all national capacity for the production of military explosives. The report cited the dangers on relying on other suppliers, even allies. After all, the report noted during the Gulf War, Britain had been denied supplies of 155 munition by one of its closest allies, Belgium, where the UK had outsourced its shell production to save money. So they outsourced shell production to Belgium, and even Belgium wouldn't give them the shells. Beside the plant in Poland, production of TNT is now concentrated in China. Custom records by Reuters show that at least 1,200 tons of TNT were exported from India in 2023 and 2024 to arms makers that supply Western forces. India also shipped large volumes of the explosive fillers RDX and HMX to Poland's Nitrochem. both India and China also have tried to maintain good relations with Russia, and neither likely would be able to fill NATO's needs even if willing. You can not imagine just how overheated the market is at the moment, said a European defense executive. The worst thing at the moment is that the global shortage of TNT and RDX, the shortage of the raw materials, is the basic reason why production cannot be ramped up much at this point. So they're importing TNT from Russia, China, and India. Okay, so 3 BRICS countries. Now, India and Russia have been best friends basically since India's independence. I did a video on this a while back. The U.S. is talking about regime change in India. They're saying that they're going to have to put sanctions on India. They're going to sanction China. They want to go to war with China. They want to go to war with the country that's supplying them. Also, keep in mind, running a factory an old factory 24/7 with tired workers doesn't seem like a very good idea in the long term. Especially when you're dealing with extremely destructive chemicals that can explode. Now, TNT I think is fairly stable, but how many munition plants have blown up with disastrous results over time? A lot of them. One factor behind America's TNT shortage dates back to the presidency of Ronald Reagan. No facility in the U.S. has been made since 1986. The Army relied on imports instead. Decades later, in 2014, the Army began to transition away from TNT to a different explosive compound called IMX 101. At the time, the Army said IMX 101 was more environmentally friendly and less vulnerable to detonation by accident or terrorist attack. That's all that matters. It's good for the environment. But Reuters learned last summer, about 17 months into the war with Ukraine, the Army quietly switched back to TNT for cost and efficiency reasons. IMX, well, less toxic, also produced some environmental downsides as its own. A statement to Reuters, and this is the U.S. Army and Reuters, this is not Russia. The Army confirmed for the first time publicly that the plan changed and it stopped producing IMX 101 for the 155 shell last July. Unexpected world events and the cost of IMX led the Army to abandon it and use TNT, which is cheaper. The years-long use of IMX slowed the production rate that artillery is now 25% higher with TNT than with IMX, the Army said. Wow. That's cool. That's really cool. So they aren't even using the new shit that they came up with. Okay. Even before the war, IMX Endeavor was struggling, Reuters found, after building the $150 million Tennessee plant to handle waste for the program. The Army hasn't used the facility. The reason, rather than manufacture precursor IMX chemicals domestically as planned, the Army imported the chemicals, negating the need for a waste plant. Army procurement official Bush said the unused facility is an insurance policy, adding, "We're going to use it at some plants." The Army largely came to depend on the one plant in Poland for the TNT supply. And the Army's contingency plan involved relying on another facility, a TNT factory in eastern Ukraine. So, the only 2 TNT factories are within hypersonic missile range of Russia, including an area that was an active war zone. Because, the Donbass war has been going on since 2014. And they thought that relying on a TNT plant in one of the most corrupt countries on Earth that was close to active fighting of a self-described enemy was a good idea. A person familiar with the matter said the U.S. imported about 500 tons of TNT before the war started. In 2022, however, the facility was quickly captured by the Russians. Ukrainian forces destroyed it before retreating, so that's gone. The U.S. announced it to build its own $650 million TNT factory will take at least 2 years to complete, which means it'll take 10 years and be $3 billion over budget. Okay, finding a war footing. Let's see here. So let's scroll down a bit. So that's part one. That's part one of the problem. That's just the TNT issue. But there is a different problem. Firing an artillery shell requires gunpowder, the propellant that is loaded separately and launches the shell when detonated. And to hit enemy positions, Ukrainian guns need to fire their 155 cannons at full range, about 25 kilometers. The gunpowder supply in what he called big tubes was in short supply. We have a lot of projectiles, but not a lot of big tubes, he said. This meant the range of his guns was restricted. The shortage of gunpowder, yet another dire issue for Ukrainian forces and for the West. Did they have like a gunpowder shortage during like the Revolutionary War or like during the Napoleonic Wars? Were they more capable of producing it back then? The process is difficult and dangerous. As with the TNT plants, Western countries have spent the years since the end of the Cold War closing powder plants. The last in the UK was shuttered in 1998, and plants closed in Romania in 2004. In 2007 in France due to insufficient orders. There is a couple remaining plants in Germany, but they're unable to meet current demands. The U.S.'s sole nitrocellulose plant is located in rural Virginia. Recent Army budget documents say the plant has exceeded its useful life. A recent equipment failure there caused one production line to close for 6 weeks to the person familiar with the matter. The place is very fragile, he said of the plant. They're gonna... Okay, so it's over a decade behind schedule. It's $200 million above cost. We have lawsuits now, litigation, final stages of commissioning and qualification, but is not yet producing large amounts of nitrocellulose for military use. The prove-out process of getting the chemical mixture just right could take years. It says the delay had no impact on the Ukraine war effort because the legacy plant still functions. Okay, so... What? So the plant that barely works is functioning, but the plant that's supposed to be new and better and semi-automated doesn't function? Whoa. Russia, meanwhile, has been expanding several gunpowder plants, all that date back to at least World War II. Its plant at the city of Kazan once made gunpowder for Catherine the Great. Even after demands fell following the collapse of the USSR, Russia managed to keep open its plants in Perm and Tambov, in part by diversifying into the supply of liquid nitrocellulose for civilian use or paints or lacquer. An interview with... Okay, so Russia was just like, you know what, we might need the gunpowder. Russia has showed it could rapidly adopt the war economy and order their industry to give priority to the war in Ukraine. It cannot marshal their huge industrial resources. Total shell production in Europe now surpasses U.S. output. Now, to my understanding, I have heard that this entire thing is a lie. I don't have the article in front of me, but I think the 2 million shells is made up, was what I heard. Here we go. There we go. EU shell production capacity supplies to Ukraine falls far short of promises. Okay, so this is from the U.S. government sponsored media. Okay, so let's see here. So the claim was that so the claim here said the claim said that They're on track to make 2 million shells this year. According to U.S. government-funded media, though, they're only producing, 550,000 shells annually. So they just lied. Estonia. So Estonian Defense Minister Ryan Mattel, they're only making 500,000. So they just were like, fuck it, let's just times it by 4. That's going to help. We just make up, pretend the shells exist. Let's see here. The officials showed off new modern lathe machines, tools from South Korea. Some were still in shrink wrap. In May, the Secretary of the Army showcased the grand opening of the state-of-the-art facility near Dallas, which will rely heavily on robots. Still, these machines aren't expected to begin producing war-ready shells until the fall. Although total U.S. monthly shell production might jump to 60,000 per month by year's end, officials say it isn't expected to reach the goal of 100,000 for another 18 months. Back on the front line. Okay, so what we have is still a pins. We are retreating village by village until we reach its homes. So that is the article. The level of stupidity involved in this, the level of incompetence. Once again, the U.S. spends where's the money going? Money's just going to Boeing or whatever. Here, I'm gonna put this in the video description, so if you want to read this article for yourself, please do. Once again, nothing in this cited was from Russian sources. Nothing in this was from Chinese sources. This was 100% from American government, European government, and stuff like that. So even if Russia were somehow to lose the war, that doesn't change the fact that this system is a complete and total disaster. So I hope people found that interesting. That was completely nuts, but that's just where we are these days. These people have no idea what they're doing. So, anyways, have a good Sunday, everyone.